Hi, my name is Bill Remak, and I'm the Healthspan Action Coalition Senior Advisor on Patient Advocacy and Coalitions. I'm going to give a talk to you about patient narratives building the global collaborative health span. So, I got started in healthcare as a scientist in the field of diagnostics. And after a number of years going through my education and then working in hospitals and laboratories, I found myself getting ill. And upon seeing a doctor to see what was wrong with me, I found out I had a chronic illness that would potentially kill me. And I was told I had to get an organ transplant, which was rather major and somewhat alarming for me because there was some inherent risks. But more importantly, there was a process. And not everyone had necessarily access or the ability to get a transplant, depending on how good their health was or whether they had the resources to socially abide by the whole stretch of different criteria and rules, both medically and psychosocial, to get an organ transplant. So at that point, I went from working as a scientist to becoming a patient fighting for my life. Now, I thought I knew a lot about healthcare, knew a lot about medicine, diagnostics, pathology, much to do about sciences. But what I didn't know was how to fully navigate the system. And that was a challenge because I was also not feeling well. So, what I learned from being a patient advocate was how to coordinate and bring people together because it took a team. It took a team of people to help one get through the obstacles and the struggles that lay ahead, especially when I was in diminished capacity, emotionally, physically, and in so many ways, finding out I was struggling in ways I had never struggled before. But I also knew that advocates come together and they find other advocates or other organizations or systems that are equally as interested in helping reform systems, helping advance research and science, and helping to find treatments and cures so that we could survive these conditions. And we've learned from, in recent times, from the examples of how to address getting masks and wearing them and when to wear them and how to form coalitions and alliances to produce these, have them available to get access, and what to do with them once we had them. We also learned how to deal with the ongoing response to a pandemic in recent years, which we had struggled with in the past historically, but not to the degree that we were faced with in the last 40 months. So I found myself in a situation having learned how to be patient advocate, how to learn how to organize groups and various stakeholders, coordinate different types of projects, how to also deal with the diplomacy of global health and Healthspan, which is having good quality of life for as long as one can and enjoy that degree of security with regards to their health and welfare is really an amazing path to look at. And there's so many conditions and diseases that affect aging. Is it about living longer or living a better quality of life for as long as possible? Well, I would say the latter. It's about quality. But to do that takes a great deal of involvement by so many interested parties, organizations, agencies, and endeavors and research. and resources to get us there. And certain policies need to be looked at and looked at in terms of where we can establish real consensus and build upon coordinating these alliances. So I'm now going to turn over Benedetta Pelosi.
I'm Benedetta Pelosi. I have a major in molecular biosciences and I was involved for 7 years in research in Sweden. If we look at the stigma of the 2023 society from a population analysis perspective, everyone have heard about infectious diseases, mental health disorders, the gut microbiota deviation, which involve many gastrointestinal conditions, and chronic diseases. However, CDC has updated fact sheets about about chronic diseases, especially after long COVID, since long COVID caused long-lasting condition. Here you have the mention of some of them. What I want to say is that the fact sheet about diseases which can affect the population nowadays, despite the help of technology, is still an impact on the modern society. Sciences are at our service. We have a list here of different sciences, the omic sciences, at molecular level, artificial intelligence, neuroscience and neurology, bioengineering, and many of them. However, we can recognize that there is a twinning among different ones that space medicine, biomedicine, behavioral and social sciences, and also regenerative medicine. So we are in a new era. The dilemma of health aging. So science and different ones, including the social sciences, can help us to understand the health span phenomenon. However, healthy aging and health span have been object of debate for centuries and even for millennia. We can go back to Aristotle and Plato to 400 before Christ. They were intrigued about aging, and his early philosophers did not really make a distinction between aging and diseases. However, Plato, after a discussion with Aristotle, thought that aging was intriguing, and Aristotle instead proposed that aging was coming just as a loss of intellect. So he started to notice that there was a process of dementia linked to the aging. Well, they didn't talk anymore about aging, and they didn't investigate the phenomenon because they thought that it was inside the natural selection, so that aging was something considered inside the evolutionary process. Only in the early 20th centuries, scientists started to notice that most mortality curves in single-cell organisms, mice and humans, shared similar structures. So the first studies to understand aging were on caloric restriction in mice. They noticed that caloric restriction intake is a parameter for healthy aging in mice. In 1988, then we started to investigate the genes involved in aging. And here we have the University of Houston in the person of Michael Klass. And Michael Klass studied worms, C. elegans, Chernobyl elegans. He noticed that genetically modified worms lived longer than the average wild ones. From his findings, then, there was the way for aging research because researchers working on class studies, they found that different genes in C. elegans were involved in healthy aging because the worms lived longer. And this led researchers to discover that the insulin-like growth factor, EGF-1, a mutation in various components of the insulin signaling pathway were found to increase lifespan later on. We need to jump in time because the history is pretty long. If not, we go to last decade milestone. So if we go to the research of last decade, we find that epigenetics and metabolism and circadian clock are key players because we started in the dietary habits have a big impact on epigenetic regulation of the metabolism, but also then societal factors such as sleep patterns, meal timing, fasting, and work shift can cause circadian misalignment. And many diseases, metabolic syndrome, rare diseases, cancer, diabetes, heart diseases, are linked to the circadian clock. So observational and experimental data points saw that also activation of immune cell and dysfunction of the immune cells are linked to circadian disruption. It has been proved that metabolites play also a role in regulation of epigenetics. Epigenetics is the science that study heritable changes in the cell which have a direct influence on gene expression. Metabolites play a role because like, for example, here is mentioned the S-adenosyl methionine. Different metabolites are required for modulation and for removing epigenetic marks on histone, causing then altering the metabolism per se. So the phenomenon of how the environment influence our metabolism and then is linked to disease became more complex in the last 5 years. However, post-COVID, we started to analyze big data to understand infectious diseases. So we had really big data analysis and also qualitative analysis was involved. What we noticed then is that diseases are subjected to multifactorial causality, and genetic environmental factor contribute to disease process. The problem is how much genetic and how much environmental factor contributes to the percentage. The real estimation is still an ongoing question. Aging is a complicated process. It's characterized by various changes at a cellular, subcellular, and nuclear level. And as we have seen before, one science is the epigenetic of aging, which is connected to different metabolic pathways. Then they started to be interested on, especially in 2018. In 2018, they tried to uncover sequence of events preceding the manifestation of disease. And we talked about the epigenetic clock. And the first clock which came was the Horvath clock. And Horvath, what he did, so they noticed that the methylation of DNA, which is an epigenetic modification, was linked to aging and different aging-related diseases. So they looked at DNA methylation profiling, and they made the first clock, which was Horvath. The problem was that was mainly for measuring chronological aging. So Later on, they needed to add more feature. Here we find the 11 clock, where they included also a phenotypic parameter. Then they add the liu clock and also the unknown clock. Orpheus clock included different parameters in order to include the DNA methylation profiles and other features for improving diagnostics. So here we can see in details. So you have different conditions and you have a different source of DNA, and you're looking at the DNA profiling. Here you have the different age estimator, that there are different 4 clocks I showed you before. And we see that epigenetic clocks were a age estimator, and the source of DNA was different one. The pan tissue one, the main one taken by different tissue, was the one of Hobart. The problem is that one of the biggest unanswered questions surrounding this clock is whether they are measuring a cause or an effect, because they gave insight in diagnostic, and they were able to train even algorithm to predict if there was a particular type of diseases, but were they really measuring the cause or the effect? So one solution was found by adding more source of DNA profiling, and I'm not reporting the studies here. The second solution was done recently when they added more biological insights in terms of features for training the algorithm. And especially in these studies, the epigenome-wide significant association was made by means of age and survival in Scotland population cohorts. Here they also had then different groups in the Scotland population as a feature, and that was an improvement. But still, is still an ongoing epigenetics clock. Still needs some improvements in terms of biological features. So now we go on. So we were inside the epigenetics, how epigenetics can be linked to age-related diseases and the aging process. Let's connect then epigenetics to our social environment. How experience affects our genes. So here we have an analysis proposed in 2020, because from 2017 we started to talk all over the world about social epigenetics. And it shows that your ethnicity gives some information, carries some genetics information. However, it's then your upbringing, the society, the community where you live that is going to have impacts on your health. And these are called the social determinants of health. The community, the infection you're going to get in your early phase, or your school habits, your nutrition habits, your economic health too. They're all social determinants. That they're going somehow to have impact on your gene expression, the so-called epigenetic modification. And I just show you the DNA methylation profiling before in terms of epigenetics clock. And all of these social determinants of health put you at disease risk over the lifespan. Here there are just some examples: early life, midlife, and late life. So the challenge, however, about these studies are so that we need to consider the genetic variation inside the population. So even if you have your data and data about the different individuals, then you have to consider the genetic variation between different populations. For example, population in Oceania, Central and Southern Africa, and Americas have thousands of genetic variants specific to each population. If this is one feature which has to be considered in the analysis. And if you want to read more on CDC, here this link. They are discussing about it. So the studies are still ongoing. Now, if we go now to more psychosocial, physiological analysis, there are 5 stages of aging. The 5 stages of aging are self-sufficiency, interdependence, dependence, crisis management, end of life. Self-sufficient is when your loved one is able to live alone and it doesn't have any sign of dementia. Then in interdependence, still your loved one start to demonstrate some sign of cognitive decline, but still is able to live alone. Only in the dependence is when you notice that your loved one can need assistance, and then it's the time to decide if you need to put your loved one in a clinic. But only in the crisis management, in when the signs of dementia are recognized and it's necessary, then the intervention of medical staff. And then it's necessary that your loved one has the medical attention needed. And the last stage is considered the end of life. Now that the pillar of healthy aging are prioritize prevention. Prevention can win all the wars, we say, because prevention is the first pillar. Since you can try to prevent whatever type of disease. So you need to check and update the recommendation concerning specific health problem. Then you need to stay physically active. Why? Because sport, like diet, influence as external cues your biological clock. Thus, you can prevent clock misalignment, which contribute to disease. Seek out adventure because if you are creative, then you stimulate the brain to make new pathways. You prevent cognitive decline. It's a process called neuroplasticity. As a last pillar, we have social connectivity. By being social, you prevent some type of diseases which involve mental health, and you also stimulate the plasticity of the brain. These are the 4 pillars that regard a healthy aging. Thank you for being with me.
So we're looking at building coalitions. And the important thing about building coalitions is what you can do when you have a coalition and how you build them. So first you have to have a coordinating body. So if you're interested in pushing a certain initiative, a referendum, you develop a shared understanding with people in the community or groups in the community that you can work with. You have some fundamental concepts on how you can work together effectively and fairly and sustain whatever the mission group's desire is collectively. And you have to identify some smart strategies to get from where you are to the results you're looking for. And you need to align policies that will be needed to help move that along. But lastly, you also want to see what you need to do to sustain the activity and the productivity and the working together and building the capacity and pursuing these reforms or changes as a group unified in that purpose. And this is how you can play a role in growing that consensus, helping invest resources, redefine the policy objectives, and embrace Healthspan in terms of the resources needed to drive further research for treatments and cures that will improve quality of life in the long term. So, what are the steps to joining Healthspan Action Coalition? Well, here is the URL, healthspanaction.org slash contact dash us, where you contact us and express your interest in joining the coalition. We look forward to having you. Thank you so much.